Okay, so our Memtas Amad Aleph, about 10 lines from the top, it's 49A2 at the very beginning of 49A2 in the art scroll. Amra Papa, Apananami Tanina, Habal Nara Marasa Eno Chai V'Adsha Tehe Nara Basula Ma'orasa V'hi Beve Savia. So remember, we're talking about is that at what point when she leaves her father's house, last week we were talking about when she was on the way with the husband's agents, or if she's with her father's agents, is she still considered to be under her her in her father's house, or in when does she become in her husband's house, even if it's before the chuppah? So Rav Papa says we learned in the Mishnah that if someone had adultery or even a rape of an Aram Arasa, he only gets the punishment of skila if she's a nara. So that when she's about 12 for the 6 months after she's a katan, but before she's a bogeres, she has to have received kedushin from a person, but not and v'hi bevei and still be in her father's house. So bishlam a nara v'lo bogeres, v'sula v'lo be'ula, maras v'lo nesua. So we understand why she has to be a nara but not a bogeres, and why she has to be a basula, virgin, and not someone who's not a virgin. Maras of lo nesua, to already have received kedushin but not full stage of nesuin, of being fully married. But but what situation does this din of this brisa or Mishnah Sanhedrin tell us? What's this case of Bevei excluding? Obviously, if she's not married yet, she's still in her father's house, because she's in her father's house until she becomes in her husband's house. So what situation could the Mishnah be referring to in Bevei Savia? Lav lemute masar av l'shlichei habal. Isn't that talking about a case to exclude the case where the father gave her to the agents of the husband, even though they're not actually haven't reached the husband's place then, but that's enough to take her out of her father's household, and she's already in the husband's household, so she's no longer considered a Nara Marasa, for whom there's a special death penalty of skila. Once she's no longer in the father's house like this, it would be the regular death penalty of chenek for a regular adultery, like a regular din of adultery. Amrav Nachmar Yitzchak Afna Nami Tanina. We learned this in another Mishnah. Haba al Eishes Ish Kevin Shnichnas Lishus Haba Linesuin. If someone had forbidden relations with a married woman, once she has entered her husband's household for Nisuin, even though the marriage hasn't been consummated yet, the adultery, or it doesn't have to be adultery, it could be, again, unfortunately, a rape or something like that, the death penalty is chenek. So nichnas l'rshus habal ba'alma shma mina. So this doesn't say that she actually needed chuppah yet. It just said nichnasa l'rshus habal l'nesuin. She entered the husband's house to be married, even though it wasn't chuppah yet. So they have the death penalty of chenek and not the death penalty of skil anymore. In that case, it wasn't limited to a nara, but we're saying that it will include a katana, include an adult, a bogeres, and it would also include the nara marasa. So that's ties in stuff that we learned from our Mishnah about that she still retains the status with the special, or how long she retains the special status of nara marasa, that the death penalty would be skila and not chenek, and that's what our Mishnah was talking about in regard to if the father goes with her, so then she hasn't left the father's rishus yet, so she would be considered namarasa. But if the father gave her over, and if they stopped off at the husband's house along the way, property of the house, instead, as a hotel, etc. New Mishnah, halfway down Mem Tesamad Aleph. So this is going to be, there's some surprising halachos in this Mishnah Gemara. I think we're going to see. A father is not obligated to feed his daughter. This drasha was expounded by Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah in front of the Chachamim in Keren B'Yavne. obviously. So that was after around the time of the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash, and the famous Gemara in Gittin that Rabbi what was after that time, but when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai pretended to be dead, so that his students smuggled him out of the besieged city, and he met with the general, and he asked for the Sanhedrin to be able to be in Yavne. He said, "Ten li Yavne v'chachamah." So in the time when the Sanhedrin was in Yavne, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah made this drasha that a father is not obligated to provide for the food for his daughter. Habanim Yershu Vabanos Yazunu. But the drasha that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said was that the Kesuva includes the fact that the sons will inherit the money in the Kesuva, and the daughters are going to be fed from the husband's estate in case he died. So just like the sons don't inherit the father's estate until the father dies, so the obligation to provide food for the daughter only applies once he dies. But while he's alive, he doesn't have necessarily an obligation to feed his daughter. We'll learn different opinions in the Gemara if there is a mitzvah for him to. Okay, so the Gemara says, he's not obligated to feed his daughter. So it implies, the implication of the Mishnah is that he's obligated to feed his sons. So bitonami. So for his daughter also, chovahu deleka hamitzvah ika. So even though there's not an obligation to feed his daughter, but there is a mitzvah to feed his daughter. Now, what the mitzvah is, if it's tzedaka or something else, maybe we'll see as we go through the Gemara here. So, but right now the Gemara is saying that our Mishnah holds that it's not an obligation to feed his daughter, but it's a mitzvah for him to provide food for his daughter. So, Mani Masnisin, who is our Mishnah like? Who's the Tan of our Mishnah? Lo Rabbi Meir, Lo Rabbi Yehuda, Lo Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. It doesn't follow the opinion of Rabbi Meir. It doesn't follow the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, and it doesn't follow the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, because we're going to see their opinions in a brisa. Tanya, because we learned in a brisa, mitzvah lazun esabanos kavachomer labanim. The first opinion in this brisa says, it's actually a tosefta, it's a mitzvah to feed, to provide food for your daughters, and kavachomer certainly for your sons to provide food to oske b'Torah, because they are busy learning Torah. So the fact that because they're learning Torah seems to be an addition. The Rashbam and Bava Basra doesn't have this line, and the Tosefta itself doesn't have this line. So that was added somewhere else, but that's not the original text of the Tosefta. It seems Divi Rabbi Meir. This is the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Huda Omer. So according to this opinion, it's a mitzvah to feed your daughters, and a kavachomer that it's a mitzvah to feed your sons, but it's not an obligation. So that doesn't fit with our Mishnah, the way we explained our Mishnah, that there's no obligation to feed your daughter, but there's obligation to feed your son, and it's a mitzvah to feed your daughter. So Rabbi Meir's opinion doesn't fit with our Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, mitzvah lazunes habanim kavachomer labanos mishum zilusa. Rabbi Yehuda says it's a mitzvah to feed your sons, and kavachomer certainly it's a mitzvah to feed your daughter, so that they shouldn't be embarrassed and stuff from having to beg for their food. So again, this opinion also holds that to feed your sons and daughters is a mitzvah, but it's no obligation. And we're interpreted our Mishnah that there is an obligation to feed your sons. no. What's the practical difference between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda? I'm not sure. It's just the difference between their opinions right now is just who's the more obvious case. Is the fact is if he teaches you have to feed your daughter and kavachomer your sons, or do you feed your sons kavachomer your daughters? So I'm not sure what the halachic difference would be between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, because in practical reasons, in practicality, it's a mitzvah to feed both your son and your daughters. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Omer, the third opinion in the Tosefta, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka says, Chova lazunas abanos la'achar misas aveyan. There's an obligation to feed your daughters after their father dies. But in the life of their father, these and these, meaning the sons and the daughters, do not have to be fed by their father. And we interpreted our Mishnah that the sons are obligated to be fed by their father, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka's opinion seems to be that sons don't have an obligation, the father isn't obligated to feed the sons either. So Amar Mas Nisan, who's our Mishnah like? Rabbi Meir ha'amar bana mitzvah. It can't be Rabbi Meir, because according to Rabbi Meir, it's a mitzvah to feed your sons, but our Mishnah said it's an obligation. Rabbi Yehuda ha'amar bana nami mitzvah. And if it's Rabbi Yehuda says that sons are also a mitzvah, but again, there's no obligation to feed your sons, and we're interpreting our Mishnah that it's an obligation to feed your sons. And according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, there's no even mitzvah to support the sons or your daughters. So our Mishnah seems to be a different opinion, not Rabbi Meir, not Rabbi Yehuda, not Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. So the Gemara says, Ibai Sema Rabbi Meir, Ibai Sema Rabbi Yehuda, Ibai Sema Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. No, we could synthesize our Mishnah's ruling with all three opinions. Not with all three at once, but we could say that each one of their opinions, even though the Tosefta isn't exactly like our Mishnah, but we can synthesize our Mishnah with their ruling in that Tosefta. Ibai Sema Rabbi Meir, if you want to say that our Mishnah follows Rabbi Meir, V'hachi Kamar, and this is what Rabbi Meir is saying. A father is not obligated to provide food for his daughter, and certainly not, and it's the same halacha for his son that he's not obligated to. Hamitzvah vito ika, but there's a mitzvah to feed his daughter. Kavachomer labanim, and kavachomer there's a mitzvah to feed his sons. B'hai diktani bito, and why did our Mishnah say bito and not say man at all? Hakamashman, it's come to teach us as we turn to Mem Tesamad Beis, that filu bito chovahu deleka. Even for the daughter, there is no obligation to feed hamitzvah ika, but there is a mitzvah. So it seems that we're modifying. So the first two lines in the Gemara, the way that we made a diuk from the Mishnah, we're saying that the diuk is not that's not the way Rabbi Meir would learn our Mishnah. So the whole reason that we said that our Mishnah doesn't accord with either of those three opinions is because of the diuk we made. But based on Rabbi Meir's opinion, we would read the Mishnah and interpret it a little different, not according to the diuk that we made. So and our Mishnah would Rabbi Meir would hold that our Mishnah says that there's a mitzvah to feed your sons and your daughter, and the Mishnah only spoke about the son, the daughter, not the son, is not to say that it's a mitzvah to feed the daughter, but it's an obligation to feed the son. That's not like we originally said. But that for a daughter, it's also a mitzvah to feed, because we that would not have been as apparent. The Ibai same Rabbi Yehuda, and we could also explain, if you want, we could explain our Mishnah like Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. And this is what the Mishnah is saying. A father is not obligated to feed his daughter, and certainly not obligated to provide food for his son. So the reason is because if he certainly doesn't want but just so the fact that the daughter would be very embarrassing and humiliating for the daughters to have to beg for money for food or for food, So for the sons, it wouldn't be as embarrassing. So the father isn't obligated to feed his daughter, and certainly not for his son, because there's lots of a need to feed his sons, because he could have his sons go out and beg, or take little odd jobs to get money. But ha mitzvah bivno ika, but there's a mitzvah to provide food for his son, kavachomer lebanos, and certainly there's a mitzvah to feed his daughters. V'hatiktani bito, and how come our Mishnah only was talking about the daughter? How come Ashmalan dafilu bito chova leka? That even though there's a bigger reason to think that there's a requirement to feed your daughters, so that they wouldn't have to be embarrassed and humiliated by having to beg, still there's no obligation to feed the daughter. It's only a mitzvah, and it's not more than a mitzvah. And if you want, we could explain a Mishnah like Rabbi Yochanan Baroka, and this is what the Mishnah is saying. You're not obligated to feed your daughter, and certainly not obligated to feed your son. And just like there's no obligation, there's not even a mitzvah to feed them. But since the daughters, after their father died, there's an obligation to feed them, as the drush of Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah in Keren B'Yavna said, Tananami eino chayav. So therefore, it says that there's no obligation to feed them while they're alive. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka holds just like there's not an obligation, there's not even a mitzvah. Rabbi La, Reish Lakish. Rabbi La said in the name of Reish Lakish, Mishum Rabbi Yehuda ben Chanina, in the name of Rabbi Yehuda bar Chanina, but Usha Hiskina, in Usha, so the Rashi points out that the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah near the end says that the Sanhedrin went to 10 places after it left Yerushalayim. So Usha, I think, was the place it went after Yavna. So it was a little bit later than the Takana in Yavna. Shehe Adam Zanes Banav Yasminosav Shehin Ketanim. That a man is obligated to feed his sons and daughters when they are ketanim, when they are minors, before bar or bas mitzvah age. So they asked, is the halacha like Rabbi La Amareish Lakish, or do we not paskin that way? It's a little bit strange because he says that in Usha they made a takana. So if they made a takana, they made the takana. And you're asking, well, did we actually paskin that way? Then it wasn't a takana. So Tashma, let's bring a proof from the following situation. Kihava asal kamed Rav Yehuda, when they would come in Rav Yehuda, that fathers were not providing food for their kids. Amar lahu, he said to them, Yarod Yalda va'avne masa shadya, a jackal gave birth, and you are throwing the to feed them on the people of your city. So the Art Scroll translates as a jackal, and there is, reasons to think that it does. So Yarod is the Aramaic word for tanin. So tanin sometimes is some type of snake or serpent, but also it is sometimes some type of jackal type animal. And Rashi says from that it's not, it mistreats its kids. So Rabbi Yehuda was criticizing the person for having kids and then not feeding them himself, and then making it a communal responsibility to feed the kids. So if there would have been an obligation, Rabbi Yehuda would have said you have to feed them. But it seemed that he was only trying to shame them into feeding his son. So it seems that the halacha is not in accordance with Rabbi Law. And also when people would come in front of Rav Chisda, and meaning whether someone would claim, complain, so-and-so is not supporting his kids, what can you do? Amar Lahu, Rav Chisda would say to those fathers, Kafule Asisa B'tzibura, So turn over a grinder, because I guess the grinder normally you put things on the top and then it would grind. Art Scroll says that it's a mortar. So I think I don't remember which one's which. The mortar is the bowl and the pestle is the thing that crushes it, or is the pestle the bowl and the mortar the thing that crushes it? So we could look it up, but Rashi calls it a machteshes, and a machteshes is a grinder. And I think there's a difference. A mortar and pestle are two different pieces, and a grinder doesn't have to be two pieces. But Rashi says you turn the grinder upside down, and you'll be on the what usually is the bottom of it, but because it's upside down, it's on the top. And now, or I'm not sure exactly. Rashi might mean that if you're calling into let's say, and I'm not sure. It seems to be a big cut, not a small grinder, or not a small thing, but because according to Rashi, it might be that you hear an echo, that you're calling into this chamber or whatever, and you hear an echo coming back out. So turn over this grinder in public, v'leikum v'leima. You should stand on top of it and say, Orva ba'i minei, ba'i b'nei. A raven wants his sons, v'hu gavrlo ba'i b'nei. And that man, meaning about himself, doesn't want his sons. So there's a medrash that says that ravens mistreat their kids, because when baby ravens are born, they're white, and so the parent, or at least the father raven, doesn't think that they're his kids because they don't look black like he does. And then once they get a little bit older, their color changes to black, and then the ravens take care of his own. So basically, it sounds like Rav Chisda saying that you have to. What do they call it in Hyde Park in London? You get on your your soapbox. So that what we would say, get on your soapbox. This is what Rav Chisda was saying. Turn over the grinder in public and stand on top and scream against the ravens, but you have to talk against yourself. Meaning it's literally I think the same. Well, not literally, but it's the exact same idea as going on a soapbox and screaming in public, except he's making him criticize himself publicly for not supporting his kids. That even ravens will support their kids, but I'm not, feeding my kids. But does a raven really care about his kids? So this we say in Psuki de Zimra every day, that Hashem provides to the sons of the children of ravens, meaning baby ones that call out, because the parent ravens are not providing food for the baby ravens, and so they have to cry out, and Hashem will provide what they need. So the Gemara says, Lo kasha haba chivri haba ukmi. These are the white ones that their parents don't want them, but with the ones that have turned dark, then the parents do provide for their kids. And now we're about halfway down Mem Testament Beis. We turn to 49b2 in the Gemara. Kihava Asi. So again, according to Rav Chisda, he couldn't obligate the father. He couldn't obligate the father to support his kids. So it must have not been the takana in Usha. Kihava Asi l'kamei de Rava. And when someone would come in front of Rava because he wasn't providing food for his kids, Amarle, Rava would say to him, Nichale lemitanze benech mitzdaka. Do you want that your children are going to be fed from tzedaka money? So in order to embarrass him into not having to needing to rely on tzedaka for his kids, he but he didn't actually say you are obligated to. So from these three instances, we see that we do not, that halacha is not like Rabbi La b'shem Rabbi Reish Lakish, that in Usha they instituted that they have to feed the minor sons and daughters. Below Amran Ela Delo Amid. But we said that there's no obligation in these cases if the father's not rich. But if he's rich, we force him even against his will that he has to provide food for his minor children. So I said at the beginning there's going to be some Gemaras that are a little bit surprising, and this is the Gemara that's a bit surprising that that you may not necessarily be obligated to feed your kids. It sounds like something very unusual.
I don't understand the whole thing why they're bringing it up. I mean, the original context was, I mean, we're in Kesuvos.
Yeah.
And you know, if once you're
But then
and stuff, I understand, then there can be questions. But in general,
right. So I mean, so we're shifting here within Kesuvos but because part of this is actually Kesuva, because we're saying that Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah said that now we write into the Kesuva that after the husband dies, the sons will support the mother from the Kesuva, and they will support and they will give food for this.
Totally
So that's the relation to Kesuva. But now we have to, if that's what the Kesuva, the Gemara goes, it's not such a big tangent, but to say, well, what's actually the father's obligation towards feeding his kids? Kihad Rava Kafil Rav Nasan Bar Ami, because for example, Rava forced Rav Nasan Bar Ami, and he forced him to pay 400 zuz for tzedaka. So the Gemara in Bava Basra says that the community can assess the taxes and for tzedakah, and they have gabaim who assess each individual household's finances, so that they will pay an appropriate amount towards the tzedakah. And if someone can't pay that much, they'll say that your tax bill is only this much, and if they're very rich, they'll say you have to pay a lot. It's not the Fritz Kagi method, even though Fritz is bound by whatever the Cook County rules are, but that the situation. So there's mentioned Tosfos here because Tosfos brings up an important point. The main sugi is in Bava Basra, but there's a principle that if someone refuses to do a positive mitzvah, Beis Din can force you to do a positive mitzvah. Like someone refuses to put on tefillin, Beis Din can force you. A little bit more problematic, but for the same reason of tzedakah, if someone was refusing to keep it of an aim, I guess this is Gemara probably Daf Lamed Beis or Lamed Gimel in Kedushin, but if someone is refusing to do kibbut of aim, is Beis Din allowed to give them malchus also? So it's actually it's according to some opinions they would give 39 malchus, but it's not Torah malchus, it's rabbinic malchus. And others say, and I think this is the Rambam's opinion, and others also, is that you can beat him until an inch of his life if he's refusing to do a mitzvah. So Tosfos says there's a principle that that Beis Din isn't allowed to force someone for a positive mitzvah if the reward is there, if the reward is listed in the Torah. So kibbut of aim, it does mention Laman Yerechun Yamecha, so you'd have long life. So kibbut of aim is a shaila. Tzedakah is also a shaila because in Parshas Re'eh, I think it's in Parshas Re'eh when they're talking about tzedakah, it says Tosfos either says Laman Yivrachacha, that you'll be blessed, or Biglal Hadavar Hazeh, because of this thing Hashem will bless you. So Rav Aaron mentioned this. I never even thought it was a question, and then he mentioned a remarkable thing, and he says, "Why does Beis Din force you? Because you might need some convincing. But if the Torah already gave you the reward for the mitzvah, you shouldn't need any convincing, because it says in the Torah, and that there's a big reward for doing it. So that's the reason Rav Aaron said that Beis Din that it's a reason for the drasha. They learned it from a drasha about why Beis Din doesn't force people to fulfill a mitzvah if the reward for it is mentioned. Sometimes you need to be reminded, but if it's the reward is listed in the Torah, you don't need the reminder. So
beating up guys and forcing them to sign.
So that's a separate shot. So the Rambam mentions that in Hilchos Gittin, and the rationale is that deep down someone really wants to do the right thing, but sometimes they're being unreasonable and don't want to do the right thing, and sometimes you need to remind them that they really want to do the right thing. So but it's specifically in the context of Gittin, Rav Aaron Paskin, based on a Gemara, a Rashi in Sanhedrin, I think, is that you could only do that when the Jewish Beis Din has the authority to issue physical punishments. So I mean, even in Israel, where there are strong laws, the only punishment the punishment that they could do is throw people in jail indefinitely now, I think. But they're not allowed to give a physical punishment. Even in Israel, the Beis Dins aren't allowed to give a physical punishment to compel a get.
I don't remember when, but it was going on for a little while.
Yeah, and those people were put in jail.
Who wanted to beat somebody?
Yeah, they did beat. Well, they did beat some people, and they were planning for other people. So I think there may have been a racketeering charge also against them. But they got like at least 10-year sentences. But it happened. It might have been more than 10 years ago already. So they may be out by now. But yeah, it's happened. It happened here in Chicago 30 something years ago or whatever. It happened in New York like 15 years ago. It happens from time to time. And I guess the lesson is that you learn one halacha doesn't make you an expert posek, because you have to learn the whole Torah to make sure you're not missing something that it's not in the place you thought it would be, but sometimes the detail is somewhere else. I mean, Rabbi Herschel Schefter from YU mentioned, I don't remember what the share was at, but it was some thing, and I heard it. I didn't hear it live, but he said that when he was when they were reviewing after he learned Bas B'chala for Smicha YU, they took an Igros Moshe, he and his Chavrusa, and they were looking at shilas that related to Bas B'chalav, and trying to figure out the answer to the shilah without looking at what Ramosha Feinstein said. And there was, I think it was a tshuva about the dishwasher, using the same dishwasher for milk and plastics, and Ramosha Feinstein brought halacha from the Gemara in Bechoros, which is about firstborn animals. So he says, just because you learned this section doesn't mean you know everything about it, because there could be halachas that are important for it, or even a halacha that's in a completely different section of the Gemara or of the Shulchan Aruch or whatever. So it's not such an easy thing to be able to paskin properly. But there it's a little different. There it's that you want to do the right thing, and let's say that you're, for whatever, gaiva or yetzer hara for whatever reason is blocking your wanting to do the right thing. So by beating him up, it's to help rid himself of his narishkeit that he didn't want to do the right thing. That's the logic of that halacha in Hilchos Gittin. But here I think is a different halacha, because there the person has to voluntarily say, because the get has to be voluntary, for the husband has to voluntarily give the get. But here, even if the guy doesn't want to put on tefillin, Beis Din, it has to beat him up and say you need to put on tefillin, even if you don't want to. So it's a slightly different rationale. So what's the force that you're able to give for to give tzedaka if it's under a category that you're not allowed to force? So one opinion is that they didn't literally force, but they got a really good salesman and who convinced the guy that he had to give the tzedaka. So it wasn't any physical coercion; it was just through words, eventually convincing him to give tzedaka. Or because the Tosfos says here, because the people of the city decided that that the city had a tzedakah budget, they had to collect, let's say, $35,000 a month for tzedakah. So people who live in the city, they automatically agree to the laws of the city. So it's considered that they gave consent to have to give their fair share, even if they didn't agree to a specific amount. So when the Gabaim of the city said that you have to pay this much, so it's a coercion that they had agreed to. So it's not considered a coercion against their will. And then in tzedakah, besides for the positive commandments, there's 2 negative commandments: not to harden your heart and not to refuse. So, so when you're not allowed, when based and wouldn't force you to fulfill a positive commandment, that's if it's only a positive commandment. But because it's a positive commandment with a negative commandment, they do have the right to force you. So tzedakah doesn't fall into the category of a positive mitzvah whose reward is written by it, because it's not just a positive commandment with the reward. With its reward mentioned, there's 2 negative commandments that you can't be hardened. You can't harden yourself to ignore the needs of other people. Amra Vila Amrish Lakish. So there's another statement that Rullah said in the name of Reish Lakish, but Usha Hiskinu, and now this one, I don't know if it makes a difference, but the first one he said in the name of Rabbi Yehuda Bar Chanina, and this one Reish Lakish didn't say in the name of Rabbi Yehuda ben Chanina. Hakosav kon chasav levanav hu ve'ishno nazunin mehem. If a person wrote over that all of his property goes to his kids immediately, even before he dies, the kids have to support him and his wife. So, and so Rashi points out is that if someone gave away all of his money, so he doesn't even have money for himself anymore, min hadin, he's allowed to do it, and he would have to find a job or whatever to feed himself. But the Chachamim made a takana that because he gave the money to his kids need to support him and his wife. Maskif la Reb Zera v'Tem Reb Shmuel bar Nachmani, Reb Zera, or maybe it was Reb Shmuel bar Nachmani who asked against this decree. Yedolam Izu Amru, Chachamim made an even bigger takana, Al Minasu Nizonis Minachasav, Hu v'Ishtomi Baya. So let's say a man died and he had a daughter, and the daughter got married. So when we mentioned that we've mentioned today and within a few times within the past few weeks that the sons are obligated to support their mother or their father's wife from the father's estate if their father dies. That's only true if it's the sons. Now it's true that there's a halacha that if he doesn't have sons, his daughter would inherit him. But it seems that there's a difference that if the daughter would get married now, so anything that she had inherited now becomes part of her husband's property also, and he doesn't have an obligation from his own side to support his late father-in-law's wife. It might be his mother-in-law, might not be his mother-in-law. So halachically, that would be the case of lekuchos. So there's certain times if you would sell your field, and then someone would have a document, a contract that you had owed them money, sometimes the property would be collected from the purchasers in order to satisfy that debt. And then what the exact way it works, I don't know, but they would lose the property and they'd have to be paid back for it. But because that property was lien, there was a lien on that property for a certain debt. When they bought it and they didn't know that it was indebted for whatever situation, whatever contract it was, the property can be seized from them, and because it wasn't really rightfully available to be on the market to be purchased by them. So they're not going to lose their money. They'll have to be paid back, but they don't necessarily get to keep the property because the property was already indebted or lien as a lien for something. So in this case, when the daughter would inherit her father's estate and she got married, so now it's considered her father's responsibility. Her husband's property, it's not considered the estate of her father anymore. So the requirement to feed the widow of this man wouldn't be obligated by a third party, and the son-in-law is considered a third party. Whereas the man's own sons are not considered a third party. They're still considered that they're using the estate of their father. Now, there's certain Gemaras where it says that once they so at some point it's still considered the estate of their father, and after things have been split up, it's no longer considered the estate of their father anymore. But for some halachos, it is considered still the estate. Meaning, Yaakov dies, so now his sons, Reuven and Shimon, have the estate. So for a certain time, it's considered the estate of Yaakov. But after they split, whatever it was, however they split it, so now there's Shimon. Shimon has his properties, and Reuven has his properties. So for some halachos, sometimes if, let's say, someone else would find that their father had a contract and certain of his properties were indebted to pay this contract, so then if that field would be taken, let's say from Shimon the son, they would have to redistribute all of the properties again, so that Reuven and Shimon would get the same amount of property, or the amount that they deserve. Let's take the case of Bechor out of it, because Bechor gets a double portion. So if one of them was a Bechor, you would split it into 3 equal portions, and the Bechor would take 2 portions. But let's just say it's a case where there's not a Bechor. Maybe the oldest was a girl or something. So they split it up equally. But then because of this contract came, and one of them lost some of their property because it had been indebted for a certain loan or whatever. So then, even though it had been split up, the splitting up of the estate has canceled, and now they have to redistribute the remaining assets minus this field, which had been indebted for that loan. So there are times where the sons themselves, after the estate has been settled, it became unsettled, and they have to settle it again. So Reb Zera or Reb Shmuel Bar Nachmani said that that the Chachamim instituted that even when it's not considered at all the property of the estate of the dead man anymore, because let's say that the only heir was a daughter and she got married, so now it's her husband. So the son-in-law of the dead man's property, he has to provide for money for his mother-in-law or his father-in-law's widow. So certainly, if this person who's not even related, and he's considered like a third party who is not related, has to provide for the mother-in-law, if a man while he was alive gave away all his money, certainly his own kids would have to support him and his wife. The Shalach Ravin Bigrate, because Ravin sent in a letter, Misha Meis, Viniach Amana Umeis, Ubas, someone who died, and he left a widow and a daughter. So obviously the daughter is his heir. The widow gets fed from his property. Nises Habas, and if the daughter got married and now her husband takes over her assets, which includes the estate of the dead father, his widow of the widow of the dead man gets fed from the property, which is now the son-in-law's property. Mesa Habas, and if the daughter died and she's not even around anymore, so now the husband inherited it because his wife died. Amar Rabbi Yehuda ben Achosas Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina. It's probably Rav Yehuda, who's an Amora, the nephew, the son of the sister of Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina, said, Al Yadi Hayamaisa, such a situation happened to me. V'amru almanaso nizonos menachasav, and Chachamim, and we paskin. So I don't know if it doesn't seem that he was the Dayan, but it seemed maybe he was one of the parties or the heirs or something. And they said, because if he was passing, why would he say they said? So, but they said that the widow gets fed from his assets, even though they they're no longer in control by his blood relatives anymore. Do we need a teaching to say that he and his wife have to be sustained, have to be fed from his own money that he gave away? So the Gemara says, no, we still need to be taught that halacha. Ma'od the same hasam hu deleka the tarach, because there, when he dies, there's no one else who is going to support the widow. So therefore, they had to make a decree that whoever has his assets from his estate has to feed the widow, because there's no one else who could provide for her. But now he's still alive. He can get a job or he can do something in order to provide for himself and his wife. Kamash Malan. Therefore, we needed to be taught that we do not say that he needs to get a job, and we say that his kids have to support him and his wife. Do we paskin like this statement of Rabbi Law, or do we not paskin like the statement of Rabbi Law that if a man gave away all of his assets to his kids while he was alive, do the kids have to support him or not? And I mean, lahavdil. Well, I don't know if it's these billionaires like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett. They did these things that when they die, they're giving most of their money to foundations for certain causes that they consider important, but they didn't give it away yet. I mean, some of them have given money for charitable foundations now, but the bulk of the stuff that they're going to be giving away, they didn't write that we're giving it away now. But I'm just lahavdil. So, but the case in our Gemara is where a man gives all of his assets away while he's still alive, so he didn't keep anything for himself. Now, what's he living in? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, obviously, have to have something, but I don't know. Or there's some type of halachic annuity that he bought an annuity for himself to either that the annuity is to be able to live in a certain place or whatever. So he has somewhere to live, but it's not necessarily considered his, that he wasn't able to give it away because he already spent the money in the annuity, so it's not his, and the annuity pays in for his rent. I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out maybe how it would work. So Tashma, we learned in the Brayso, Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Yonasan have a kaime. Rabbi Yonasan and Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Yonasan were together. So a certain man came by and kissed Rabbi Yonasan on his knee. Amar le Rabbi Chanina, my high. So Rabbi Chanina said, why is this guy kissing your foot or your knee? Amar le kosim nechasel levanavu. He was the person who wrote all of his property to his sons. We turn to Nun Aman Aleph. Sisinhu lizane, and I forced them to the sons to feed him. So if the halacha is not like Rabbi La Mishum Hachi Asinhu, how did Rabbi Yonasan so when Rabbi Yonasan forced them, so Rabbi Yonasan did a great thing from his own volition to force the kids to feed him. So therefore, the man was so appreciative. He kissed Rabbi Yonasan in public on his knee. Aliyah Mardina Asinu Bai. But if the halacha was in accordance to Rabbi Law, why did Rabbi Yonasan have to force him? That's already the halacha. So Rabbi Yonasan wouldn't have had to say I had to force them. So it must be that the halacha is not like Rabbi Law. So the second halacha in a row here, we say we don't pass like Rabbi Law. Rabbi Law, third case here, Rabbi Law said, and this one is not in the name of Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. So it's a strange pattern. The first case, Rabbi Law in the name of Reish Lakish, was in the name of Rabbi Yehuda Bar Chanina. The second case was just Rabbi Law in the name of Reish Lakish. And now Rabbi Law just said himself. This is a very important halacha, which is also in Bava Kama in the end of the first parak. Oh, they don't quote it here that it's in Bava Kama. That someone who spends money for tzedaka, cannot spend more than a fifth. He cannot spend more than 20. He can't give away more than 20% to tzedakah. Tanina Mihachtu, we learned a bright like this. Someone who spends tzedakah shouldn't spend more than 20% on tzedakah. Shemi tzarech lebrios, because maybe he is giving away too much of his own money for tzedakah, and then he will himself need to be supported by tzedakah. And someone wanted to give more, and his friend did not let him. Ma umanu, who is the friend? Rabbi Yeshovev. Rabbi Yeshovev, who probably was, I think, Rabbi Yeshovev HaSofer, who I think, I don't know if he was an early Tana, and I don't know if he was one of the Asar Regei Malchus or not. The Amrila, and some said that Rabbi Yeshovev was the one who wanted to give more than that, and his colleague, his friend, didn't let him give that much. Umanu, and who was the friend who didn't let him? Rabbi Akiva. It was Rabbi Akiva. Rav Nachman became Rav Achbar Yaakov. Rav Nachman said, and some say it was Rav Achbar Yaakov, says, Mikra, what's the pasuk that they based it on? So if it was a takana, it's not a law in the Torah, but many takanos were based on a pasuk. So what's the source? So when Yaakov was leaving from his father's house, when Esau was going to kill him in Parshas, the beginning of Parshas Vayetze, when he slept by Har Moriah, he said, anything you give to me, Hashem, aser asren ulach. So we call the word meiser, but the word meiser is from the word eser. So meiser means a tenth. So when he said aser asrenu, I'm going to give a tenth. The pshat that we say aser asrenu, I will certainly give. When the Torah doubles up a verb, in English we can't translate the double verb, so we say I will certainly do this. But the drasha is I'll give a tenth and I'll give another tenth. So he'll give 2/10, which is a fifth, which is 20%. The holo dami isura basur l'isure kama. So the Gemara says, well, you can't say that because the 2/10 aren't equal. Let's say you had $1,000. If you give a tenth, how much is a tenth? $100. What's left? $900. So how much is the second tenth? A tenth of $900 is only $90. So they're not equal tenths, because once you spend the first tenth, there's less principle to take a tenth off the second time. Amravashi asrenu labasra kikama. So the word asrenu, I will give a tenth of it, is saying that Yaakov was saying labasra kikama. I'm giving the second one as a tenth, just like the first one, even though it's a little bit more than a tenth. So a couple things. So there's a story that in the time, well, I don't remember exactly which time, but it probably was, it wasn't later than the time of Rabbi Chaim Volozhiner, but I mean, Rav Aaron and his father and his grandfather were descendants of Rabbi Chaim Volozhiner. Through one of Reb Chaim Volozhiner's granddaughters, I think, but one of their forebears from their father's side, a Soloveitchik, had been a wealthy person, and he had lost all his money, and he went to head of Din Torah. He went to the Rav and said, why did I lose all my money? And they investigated that at the time that the city burnt down. So because the city burnt down, people didn't have food, people didn't have clothes, people didn't have shelter. He gave a tremendous percentage of his money to tzedakah, and it was much more than the 20th. So the Din Torah concluded that the reason that he lost his money because he gave too much tzedakah. He gave more than the 20% here. So when the Gemara says you can't give more because if you give too much, you might become poor. So there was a story like that from Rav Aaron's family. And then just in general, yeah. But let's say they gave away 50% or 70%. So they didn't give away everything, but because they gave too much tzedakah, Hashem punished him by making his businesses become unsuccessful, and then he lost his wealth. And then in general, we say that there's a obligation of meiser, of giving a tenth to tzedakah. That's the opinion of Rabbeinu Yerucham. the Rambam's opinion is really that you should give 20%, not more than 20%. But when the world says that you give 10%, it's a machlokas rishonim, and that's Rabbi Yeruchman. I think the Shulchan Aruch passes that way, but the Rambam in Pirush Mishnah, it must be in Peah, because a lot of the tzedaka stuff is in towards the end of Maseches Peah. You must say it there that the obligation of tzedaka is 20%, not 10%. Okay, we'll leave it here. We should hear good news that the captives have been returned, and we should hear that the soldiers are being successful in their mission.